Welcome. Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, and welcome to my podcast today, What the Waltons Gates Taught Stephan Roche About Power, Legacy, and Leadership. Right before we get to that, and I know we're starting just a pinch late, it's been a couple of weeks, so I returned everyone from the West Coast. It was a whirlwind travel to Nevada, Utah, and briefly Wyoming, and lots of new content. So many of you know last year I was extremely active on long form 2 or 3 hour interviews. And I love to do those. And you're going to kind of see one today making a run at an hour and a half or longer with Stephan. And that's going to be incredible. But I've been doing more and more shorts as solos. I've been hosting many more programs and events for my members. And if you go to angelorobles.com, you'll simply learn a lot about what I'm doing. And it's been a whirlwind year, especially for travel. So it's been a while since I've done one of these long form interviews and very much looking forward to it. Again, what the Walton Gates taught Stephan Roche about power, leadership, and legacy. Obviously, that means my guest today must mean Stephan Roche, partner at Banyan Capital. In my opinion, there are probably less than 20 really true mega quote unquote single family offices in the world with honestly massive amounts of capital, complex structures, and often multi-generational strategic depth. Stephan, as I mentioned, now a partner at BanyanGlobal, previously held senior positions, executive roles at two of those most iconic and influential family offices. A CEO of Walton Enterprises, stewarding the legacy of the quote unquote Walmart fortune, and COO of Cascade Asset Management, managing private capital for Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation. On that note, Stephan, it's so great to see you again. Welcome to the show.
Nice to see you. And thank you so much for inviting me to join you.
It's a pleasure. So, again, back from my West Coast travels, got to get back in the swing of my long form interviews. And I just have so many thoughts and questions that I want to learn from your experiences, which are incredible. Why don't I start with what do the world's wealthiest families, what do they really prioritize behind closed doors?
Angela, that is a great question. And it's one of the things that I think about when I was in the roles working with the Gates and then the Waltons. And it would start with the fact that it's not about performance. It's not about tax efficiency, at least primarily. Most great families start with a sense of purpose. What are we doing together as a collective family? Why do we want to stay together? How do we want to think about our legacy on a multi-generational basis? And you have to start there because otherwise what happens is instead of your family really driving the purpose of your wealth, your family being at the lead, the wealth becomes the lead. And so what I talk about is you don't want the family to serve the wealth. You want the wealth to serve the family. And in that way, what you're doing is you're giving an opportunity for that wealth to create the space, the potential for the family to reach its personal, its business, its philanthropic aspirations. That's what the great families do. They think about the financial capital as one of the areas that they want to grow and develop over time, and not necessarily the predominant one. I'd love to explore a little bit more about that at some point in our conversation, because so many families focus on wealth preservation and not wealth growth, but that's a smaller piece of the pie. That is part of what makes a great family, is thinking about that wealth in a different way. But the really great families understand that in order to be a successful multi-generational family, you've got to be thinking about values. You've got to be thinking about purpose. You've got to be thinking about those aspects of being a family that aren't necessarily related to the fact of the wealth, but are related to the fact of being a family and all the dynamics that entails. And I'll end this thought with one additional insight, which is the leaders of great family offices understand that their role is more than just being a steward of the financial wealth that they oversee. It's also about playing a part in helping create a very positive family dynamic. So thinking about sometimes you're a diplomat, sometimes you're a therapist, sometimes you're helping families who might have what we sometimes call fake harmony. And that's another topic that can be really interesting to delve into. What does that mean, fake harmony? Why is it fake harmony that often leads to failure in family offices? And so those are the kinds of things that as a family office leader, you should be thinking about. And so really great families, it's about nuance. It's about the breadth of uh, experience required to be successful. And it's about thinking on a multi-generational basis.
Wow, that's great. So let's dive a little bit into that, and we'll come back to that throughout our longer forum interview. I agree with you that it starts with purpose. From the outside looking in, people are going to think and almost chuckle that's almost all too easy. But we know that it's not, especially in a multi generational family where the rising generations may have, let's go with the word, a different purpose, different
Yes.
perspective, a varying culture. Uh, Perhaps in the Gates, you didn't have to deal with that as much, but certainly in the Waltons, what lessons did you learn about identifying purpose and why it needs to adapt? And all that comes with culture into leadership.
It's funny. It's a great question, and I've seen this not just with the Gates and the Waltons, but I've now worked with more than a dozen other families, and I also am very close to many other family office heads. And so this is a discussion that we have quite often, and it's a recurring topic. What actually is purpose? So some people will talk about the purpose for their family business, the operating business from where the wealth came. Some people talk about the purpose of the family office. Well, what is this family office? What should it be doing for us? Some people talk about the purpose of the foundation. I like to go one level up. I like to go to the canopy level, where you're talking about the purpose for this family staying together collectively on a multi-generational basis. And that's where I think a lot about, are there archetypes of families? Because you see some families and they say, we're an entrepreneurial family. Other families will say, we are a family all about leadership. One of the great families in the history of America is the Rockefellers. They had a very intensive, very intentional focus on leadership. In fact, one of the things that they used to say, and probably still do, is that what they were training as Rockefellers is to be a Rockefeller. And that meant to be a community leader, to be a philanthropic leader. There are over 250 lineal descendants of the Rockefeller family today. And what I think you'd find is that that is a group of people who have a very cohesive understanding of their purpose as a family. You might have a family that's about impact. You might have a family that is about politics. It's really interesting when you start thinking about those archetypes, when you start thinking about what is the purpose of the family, it comes down to what are our values and what's our vision. Our values as a family. And one of the things I tell you, Angelo, is so many people make the mistake of thinking that everyone in the family must have the same values. And of course, that's impossible. Every family, I mean, truly, it's really funny when I have seen families do the values exercise where they have a stack of values and usually it's cards or something like that. You have a stack of values and call it, 60 different types of values you could have as an individual. And you start with, all right, pick the top 10. Now pick the top 5. Now pick your top 3 values. Now compare your top 3 values to your spouse. That's a little dangerous. Now compare it to your now compare it to your other family members. And what can be staggering is how different those values are. So how do we think about collective values if our individual values are different? Well, that's an important distinction because you can have collective values, but what you want to make sure is that those collective values that you have, that there's a connection back to your individual values, that there's a connection back to the individual purpose of the family members. And if you have that, if you have a really strong sense of the collective values of the family, what type of family you are, and what your own individual purpose and values are, that makes for an extraordinary multi-generational legacy. If you don't have that,
Huh.
I think it's worth stepping back and saying, without that, how should we think about the purpose of our family? How should we think about this, how this wealth can serve the family and our collective purpose and our individual purpose? And those are some hard questions to really tackle. What I found is the best families really know how to spend the time, effort, and energy to really understand all of that before they start thinking about the trust, there's estates, their tax efficient wealth distribution strategies, their asset allocation, their whether or not they should invest in their friend's business. Because if you do this at the front end, it's so powerful. And the last thing you need to do is you need to refresh that work on a regular basis. Is that every 5 years, 10 years? It really depends on the family, but I would say you just need to be thoughtful about the fact that these um, the sense of purpose can evolve over time, and that's really where you get into how do younger generations and older generation, sometimes there's a little bit of conflict. How do you try to get them back into cohesion?
I'm going to ask a question about that. I call it being adaptive shortly, but you said a couple of things that I think I want to one, and I hate to be greedy, but audience, I often ask and do these interviews as if it really is just me and my guest, in this case, Stephen, because I want to learn, because I'm obsessed with single family offices, and Stephen has such a wonderful perspective and background. So if I'm a little greedy with my questions, you'll have to pardon me, but hopefully you'll all get value from it. When you mentioned the Rockefellers, I thought back to 200 years ago when the Rockefellers were not yet the Rockefellers that we know. That would soon come decades later. What I'm thinking about and thinking out loud is it takes one person to effectively change everything. And that applies in today's world as well. So leadership was so instilled that even 150 years after the initial creation of wealth, it still is foundational to the family. How would I define leadership? The capacity to inspire and the ability to serve. And I think there's not one perfect definition, a little bit like you said with purpose. It depends. How do you look into something like leadership? And then I'm going to throw a curveball part two. Being an aficionado of the single family office, the Rockefellers perhaps being the first, in the 1880s, they hired their lead executive, who was not in finance, legal, or accounting. It was Frederick Gates, who I believe was a pastor, was a minister, which
Hmm.
implies he probably knew how to listen. He had an understanding of history, and he understood the nuances and emotions of families. So I'm throwing a lot at you there,
Yeah.
from it takes one person to leadership to the importance of the executive, who's the head of the family office. And that helped to collectively impact the Rockefellers moving forward well over 150 years later.
I think the this concept of being a pastor is such an important concept that you're raising in terms of it can apply to either family members or to the non-family leaders of their family office. But a pastor, first and foremost, knows how to listen. And a pastor understands that in listening, you derive your superpower because you then understand, and then you can seek to get others to understand you. But when you understand, that is a position of power and strength in terms of understanding how do you then lead. And truly, the best leaders lead from behind, right? I'm sure you and I, Angelo, could talk about positional power versus the power of influence for the next 90 minutes. And I am such a believer that people see positional power as more important, and it is not. The great unlock is to understand, how do I influence people even if I don't have positional power? Because the truth is that in a family, you can be CEO of a family office, but you can't fire a family member. And so that's one of the big distinctions between being a family office lead and being a lead in a typical corporation. And even if a family business is slightly different than a family office. One of the things we talk about with a family office, which I'm sure you can appreciate, is a family office is a co-op, right? Because the owners are also the customers. And so you have this really interesting phenomenon where the way that you can build effectiveness within that co-op is, again, you have to listen. So I think of listening as a superpower for any family office lead, because that is the core to being a successful diplomat, the core to being a great therapist, right? So if you go back to that, the pastor who was the first Rockefeller family office lead, it doesn't surprise me. I did not know that story, but it doesn't surprise me at all, at all. And I am a huge fan of tax lawyers and tax accountants, I think they're absolutely extraordinarily important for great families, but they don't often make the best family office heads, and not because they can't. It's just they typically have a sense of a set of skills that are very technical and specific and make them great at what they do, and they haven't necessarily developed these other skills that are so important to leadership. And it is, as you know, as much EQ as it is IQ to be effective in working with families. And great families also know how to be very open, honest, and direct with their family office heads and the family office executives, so that the family office executive can be more effective. So all of this plays into this idea of how do you create a great family office? It's subtle, honestly. It's nuance. It takes time and effort. It's not just because you have great wealth doesn't make a great family office. And again, it goes all the way back to that concept that you don't want your family to be in service of the wealth. You want the wealth to be in service of your family. And in order for that to happen, you really need to understand, what is it that my family is seeking to achieve? What are our aspirations? And 150 years later, the Rockefeller family is one of the most extraordinary families in American history, and probably the history of the world. But there are families that are uh, you know many generations deeper in Asia and Europe and South America. So those are also really interesting stories to tell.
Well, since you bring it up and going a little bit off script, which I love to do, you are correct. In my travels to Europe, I can think of the Habsburgs, having met some of them and other
Hmm.
families. And one of them, Octavian Palati, that I interviewed, boy, I don't know how many generations, Stephen, but when I asked him, how far does your family go back in terms of, let's call it, having wealth and legacy? Oh, Angelo, about 1,050 years. Like, okay, that's in
Amazing.
Habsburg's about 700. So you are correct. The Rockefellers are relatively a newbie. So
Yes.
my question in trying to craft a question is, I did ask him in terms of things like legacy and leadership, and I also asked about
Hmm.
assets, and he mentioned things like land, art,
Hmm.
gold, uh, even diamonds and gems, things that have withstood, quote unquote, the test of time as assets that have held their worth. He also spoke about, and it may get to be a little bit of a sensitive subject. Yeah, we do understand that if the masses were to ever rise, there's way more of them than us. We do need to have a balance of a level of influence and fairness in society. Now, we could argue then members of the family went into clergy, which he said, went into military, and went into politics, basically three
Hmm.
things. Maybe
Yes.
maybe today's variation of that could be media, investment banking. The world has changed, but the
Hmm.
concept of maintaining, and I don't know why this has a negative connotation, but power and influence really never changes. If you could talk a little bit from your perspective, not even the two that you worked for, which were very prominent, but like you said, the dozens that you've advised, the importance of looking at history, which I'm a advocate of, the importance of understanding how things adapt. Yet the more they adapt, some principles about human biology, evolutionary psychology, and how we process information, make decisions, and our wants and needs, well, that's kind of baked into us.
Hmm. Well, I have two stories that I'd love to share, and they're very telling. And I imagine you have, many similar stories. There was a story of a family in Europe who I met, and they are on their 29th generation, 29, right? And I asked them, what are your priorities today? And the head of the family is a family member who also leads the family office. And I said, what are your priorities? And what was so fascinating is that his priorities were identical to the priorities that I was really focused on in my role working with Walton Enterprises at the time. Generational transitions, leadership development in the next generation? How do you incorporate impact? Something that I hope we can touch on in our conversation, given how much that is really influencing this next generation within wealth. All the same issues, and yet they're 29 generations in. How powerful is that? To remind us that they're not new issues, they're hard issues, and they're never fully solved. But the idea is to continue to return back to them, so that you're thinking about them, that you're really engaging with these issues because they're important to get right if you want to have a 29 generation family. And I got to tell you, 29 generations is a lot. Okay, fast forward, I met them a few years ago. Fast forward about 6 months after I met that family, I had an opportunity to meet a family from India, a royal family from India. And I was talking to the prince and princess of that family. And I said, "How many generations are you?" The answer was 99. I mean, to say my jaw dropped to the floor, Angelo, I mean, I'm not even sure I understand the math on 99 generations. It's an extraordinary thing. Extraordinary. Now, with 99 generations, there are so many decisions you have to make right over time to ensure that your family still has that. They literally live in the family palace. The art that they've been living with as a family for more than 1,000 years. The reason I got to meet them was that they had, for the very first time in their family's history, taken the art out of their palace and had a special exhibition at the Freer Sackler Gallery in Washington, D.C. And my wife just happens to be on the board, or happened to be at the time, I should say, on the board. And so we had an opportunity to see that art, which was extraordinary, but to also meet the family. And to understand what that means and how to get to 99 generations is to really get an insight into what you should do today when you're at G1, when you're at G2, and the G2 to G3 transition, which you and I both know is actually the most difficult transition. It's not G1 to G2, it's G2 to G3. And so really thinking hard about the implications of that is so interesting and fascinating and fun. But it also speaks to the fact that even, as you said, these are human problems that have existed and will exist in all the past and all the future.
Ah, yes. And audience, I promise, speaking of the future, yes, we will get to AI and some of Stephen's perspectives and feedback that he's getting from the families. Stephen, I'm kind of known as the AI guy in the family office world. I don't know if that's a good thing. I don't know if it's a bad thing either. It's just the reality. But we'll get to some of that. But I think it's important to
Good.
build up. So what you said was from second generation to third. Correct. That's historically been the most challenged. But I would like to talk about something that a mutual friend and colleague noted. I believe it was Dennis Jaffe who stated it really is up to the second generation whether they want to be, let's go with the word, a dynastic family.
Yeah.
Why, and I know you're not Dennis, but why would Dennis say that? And has that been your experience? Your experience with the Gates wouldn't quite transition into that, but with Waltons, it probably did. And with
Oh,
other
absolutely.
families. Why is it so important for that second generation to decide we are going to be a dynastic family?
Well, I love Dennis Jaffe. I think he is just an extraordinary um, gentleman. And I use the word gentleman very deliberately because he is somebody who is willing to share his experience, his insights, his ideas in a way that not many people in the family office world have had as much influence as Dennis. And I joined BanyanGlobal full time recently, and I got to know uh, Dennis, probably the last 2 or 3 years, and he's a gem in the family office world. But I'm going to disagree with him.
Okay, let's
The
do it.
reason the reason is I think you have to make that decision has to be made every generation. I think it's not even the hardest moment to make the decision at G2, but I think it's a decision that needs to be made at G1 and G2 and G3 and G4 and beyond. And it's a decision that you have to come back and revisit. And you want to be very thoughtful about it because again, when you're talking about do we want to be a dynastic family, I think of that as being equivalent. Do we want to be a wealthy family? It's not the right question. The right question is, what is the purpose for us as a family staying together as a collective. What value is there for the family, for our society? How do we collectively benefit from staying together? Or are we better separating? Because there are great families who have separated. And honestly, some of the best examples of families that are healthy, high functioning, great relationships are families who made a decision, and might have been G2, it might have been G3, it might have been G4, who said, we are better separate than we are together. And frankly, the best, you know this as well as I do, Angelo, the best, um, the great families in Europe who have been the most successful getting to 29 generations are actually ruthless in pairing the family tree. They are, primogeniture, this idea that the eldest male, which is the true primogeniture, but more and more it's the eldest child, gets all of the wealth, and then they get to determine how that wealth gets allocated to their family. But then it really stays in the family in that way. The 29 generation family that I mentioned, that's how they do it. Only one family member gets all of the wealth, and they then have that choice to how to allocate those resources to their family. And typically they don't allocate a lot because they want to preserve that wealth, because of what they think they can achieve being a very tightly controlled family. So I would say, if you really want to be a successful dynastic family, really understand what it is about being a successful dynastic family, why that matters, or otherwise, I think have the choice to break free from that. Um, uh, what might feel even like a burden, an obligation to stay together, and that oftentimes can be more toxic and kind of a virus in a family. It's like we must stay together because we must stay together. No, no, you must stay together because of the things that we can do collectively as a family that we can't do independently, and that is something we choose to do. That's the most powerful thing you can do, and so it's that power of choice.
Well, you said a lot of interesting things there. Uh, Warren Buffett has a comment. I believe it's something like decision makers. Huh. I believe in an odd number and it's less than three, implying that a singular person who's qualified streamlines things for everyone. Not everyone wants the pressure of making tough decisions, the burden, and sometimes the hate that comes with it. I agree that streamlining it, some would say that's a little top down, uh, absolutely makes it easier. And maybe that's not
Mhm.
to be discounted. I
Yeah.
don't know if it's fair. Fair's a word that could be, we could debate that. Uh, and that goes to governance, which is how decisions are made. Is that implied in a board of directors? Is that implied in a mission, a vision statement, a family constitution? And with each generation taking, let's go with the word power, apparently I like that word. How do those documents adapt and evolve over time? And should they?
Oh, yes. Great questions. All of these. Um, I worked with a client, and one of the early conversations we had with him, in this case, was, "Do you have an investment committee?" And he said, "Of course I do. I look at him in the mirror every morning." And I quite appreciate that. Um, it is, G1s really do, if they're the wealth creators, they really have set the family up in a very successful way. I'm gonna diverge for a moment. I probably shouldn't talk about other podcasts, but I am just for a moment, because there's
Oh, it's
another
okay.
podcast called Acquired, and there's a story of Hermes, or the story of Rolex, which are so powerful, because these are, today we think of Hermes and Rolex as being two of the greatest um, brands, and really family stories. And Rolex even more powerful because the company is now owned by a foundation. It is not owned by a family. Um, but in Hermes, it is still the Hermes family. What's so fascinating about these, Angelo, is in both cases, the early founders struggled so much. There was absolutely nothing about the creation of those two brands, those two extraordinary firms, that was obvious or destined from the early days of the G1 wealth creator. And so wealth creators, they work hard to create this wealth. They work hard to create this opportunity for the family. So as you think about that, and then you think about, okay, well, how do you, as a wealth creator, how do you create a family office? How do you start to think about purpose? That becomes very difficult. A family office is often a mirror of the founder's values. It's a mirror of their needs. It's a mirror of their perspective on the world. And that can be good and it can be bad. And so at Banyan, one of the things that we are most noted for is our understanding and depth of expertise in creating great governance and helping families understand ownership versus um, being a director on a board versus being a manager. We understand what decisions need to be in what place for a really effective family. And that a wealth creator, we talk about this. This is kind of an interesting framework we use. If you're a wealth creator, you're an owner, you're a director, as in a board of directors director, and your management, and you often are also running the family. And we like to think about those as the 5 rooms. But as a wealth creator, excuse me, 4 rooms. As a wealth creator, you're just living in a loft. All those rooms are together. You sit at the center. You control all those decisions, and it is one room. But as you get to G2, G3, and beyond, you have to start to separate those rooms. Otherwise, that becomes, I would say, utterly messy, chaotic. You create, and those were really where families fail. So great governance starts to separate the decision rights for each type of family member. Are you just an owner? Are you involved in the board? If you're the owner, you're in the owner's room. There are certain decision rights that are held at the owner's room. If you're on the board, you're in the boardroom. Certain decision rights there. As a board member, you have oversight, supervision of the corporation. You're typically setting strategy. You're typically hiring and firing the CEO, but you're not getting into day-to-day operations. That's left for the management room. And some families have a lot of family members who are working in the business. Other families have none. And it's a decision that you need to make as a family. What are the decision rights you leave at the management room? What decisions do you allow the CEO to make? What are at the boardroom? What are in the shareholder or owner's room? And then we set aside over here the family room. This is more, how do we as a family want to be together as a family? And that's stuff where you put in, your family-owned properties, potentially your philanthropy, other decisions that you want to make, that just, let's have a family reunion, let's go travel, let's get on the yacht. Those are in the family room. And so by being really deliberate and intentional about separating those rooms, separating the decisions, and holding your family accountable for those, that's going to be when you have the best governance, when you have the best, most effective oversight and control of the operating businesses, if you have one, of the family office, if that's actually more the focus of that governance. So I personally am a very big believer in having really strong, well-articulated governance. And as you know, that's governance at the end of the day is just another word for decision making.
Hi,
I mean,
exactly.
and
I'm
I love,
gonna
and I'll just one thing. I'm sorry, Angelo,
sure.
but just one thought on that Warren Buffett comment. I do love that. But the problem with that is that if you say I prefer decisions to be made by an odd number of people, less than 3. The problem with that is you actually can't do that when you get to bigger families, and families grow exponentially, and you have to be really thoughtful about that. It might work okay for the G1, but quite honestly, if a G1 never teaches their family members how to make decisions and they pass
Exactly.
away, boy, have they left a mess.
I'm going to give a little bit of pushback, but in a positive way. Of course, I believe in governance, a level of structure and systems, absolutely a family constitution, a mission and vision statement, although sometimes they could be a little fluffy. Uh, my question is going to center around when there gets to be too many, let's go with the word structures, systems, rules.
Yes.
It has advantages. It has disadvantages, in my opinion, making the family bureaucratic, slow, and the opposite of being anti-fragile, they become more fragile. How do you balance when it's overkill? And how do you have the family make that decision whether it's singular or, pardon the pun a little bit, in a committee or a group. Again, adding to the layers of complexity. When is enough enough?
Wow. I mean, that is such a great question because it really points to some of the greatest challenges. And so I'll give you an example. I worked with a client to create a conflict resolution policy, and I came in late to the process. And the conflict resolution policy, when I entered the process, was a um, Word document that was, gosh, it had to have been 30 pages, and 25 of the 30 pages were just a chart listing every single potential conflict, and then a essentially a path to resolution for every single one of those conflicts. I looked at that and I said, well, that could be an infinitely long document. Think about how many different conflicts you have. And think about the conflicts that you as a family bring to the table every time you sit down as a family. I always talk about the fact that when you get into family boardrooms, sometimes you don't leave at the door when Bobby pulled Sally's hair at age 10, and you have to. And so, how do you resolve that, right? So, we went back to the drawing board, and I said, my goal is to get this conflict policy resolution policy to a half page, and I think we can do it, and we did. And the conflict resolution policy got down to essentially family member who feels that they have been in some way wronged by another family member. They have a set of obligations. Number one, to raise the issue directly with the family member who created the offense. If they do that and they don't feel it's adequately resolved, there was a group of family members who served in a capacity to help participate in conflict resolution, and they would go to that group, and then that group had a plan for how do they, essentially listen to the complaints and try to help resolve those complaints. Often that group could bring an outside therapist in or an outside professional coach in, somebody who could help do the conflict moderation, facilitate the right conversation that needs to happen. And then step three was essentially, if that group felt like this particular issue was sufficiently bad, that family member could be on a temporary basis kicked out of the family council. So not have their vote for that period of time not be effective. And I will tell you, it has been several years, and nobody has gotten to that level, right? And the reason
Excellent.
is holding people accountable. It's very hard to hold people of wealth accountable. That's the other side of wealth. And I think you know that, Angela, that's one of the real challenges is how do we hold people accountable when they have that much wealth? And of course, the wealth often brings the power and influence. So being able to hold a family member accountable for their behavior is really important. But what you hope to do is create an environment in which you never have to hold them accountable with a tool that is as threatening as we're going to kick you off the family council. But at least you know it's there,
It's there. Yeah. Like I was going to
right?
say.
So to me, those are the kinds of things when you talk about um, policies and boards and governance and creating sclerotic big bureaucracies. As well as I do. People say, well, government is so bureaucratic. Well, you know what is also really bureaucratic is Microsoft, right? One of the greatest companies in the last 150 years. It's really bureaucratic. Why? Because decision making when you have that many employees is hard. And if bureaucracy and governance and decision making are all the same thing, just three different words. So how do you make sure that you have a streamlined governance that makes sense for your family? Is to consistently, with vigor and rigor, refresh your governance to make sure it's meeting the needs of the family. And I'll give you two thoughts. One is you have to move at the speed of the family. You can't move faster than the family can move. And if you do, the family won't keep up in it. And whatever you do in working with the family, if you're a family member, you can't move faster than the family, which doesn't mean you have to move at the slowest family member. That's a different thing. But you have to work with the family to move them at a speed that is appropriate for that family. And the second thing I'll say is that you want to make sure that your governance has outside independent non-family members, because that's going to make it better. And I just believe that in my heart and soul, that when you have an independent non-family member in the room with family, that moment, that time when Bobby pulled Sally's hair, that won't get raised. Why? Because the family member's kind of embarrassed to say anything about that. They sit up a little straighter. They want to show the independent director or whatever role they play that they are professional, that they're thoughtful, that they are good critical thinkers, and you just see a different bearing. You see a different dynamic when you have third parties in the room with families making decisions. Now, of course, that doesn't, you don't want outsiders on everything. There's some certain family decisions like, well, where should we go for the next family meeting? That should be the family. But when you're talking about running a foundation, an investment committee, the operating business, you definitely want to have third parties in there, independent voices, independent experience, independent opportunities to help the family see things in a different way.
I don't disagree. I would say I agree, but I have to live up to my reputation of being a little frustrating and annoying to people I interview sometimes, Stephen. I've been too nice.
Let me have
I
it.
have been on record, so I guess I got to live up to it. No one cares about your money like you.
Hmm.
Being bloodline means something. And being an outsider, just my coming up on 6 decades on Earth, I just know realities that most people really aren't great. They're probably not even good. They may be well intentioned, they're just adequate.
Yeah.
And that includes people from successful families, those that advise. How do I know that someone's going to be aligned with our purpose and intent? And are they really going to care about things the way that I would as a bloodline?
Hmm.
Therefore, if I start to outsource everything, I'm outsourcing investment management, I'm outsourcing taxes, I'm outsourcing, well, let's go with how I think. And then inevitably, the family becomes stale. They lack critical
Yes.
thinking, they lack the ability to have confrontation, which I mean, maybe my Italian heritage or used to be in confrontational. I don't know. Like I don't look at that as being a negative. I'm more concerned about outsiders who are trying to tell me, and admittingly, I'm a first gen, so I'm going to be a little bit more that type A entrepreneur, a little bit like the Buffett example I gave you before. How do you deal with someone like me? Just maybe add a couple of more zeros to me. Uh, and am I necessarily wrong in terms of you can't be outsourcing and having outsiders into everything? You're rich because your family is rich in legacy and history, as well as monetary purpose. And maybe in there, in that story and that legacy, are the answers. You don't need outsiders for everything.
It is an interesting question, and it's a one thing I'd say is as I have worked with a family where the outsiders actually probably are directly responsible for them having to sell their family business and ultimately the really crushing their legacy because the
Yeah,
outsiders essentially took over. And I'll tell you, you see that in family foundations. There are very, very few family foundations who have made the who have gotten past G3 in terms of the family leadership
yeah,
of the
very few.
foundation. And it's remarkable to me how few. Now, I have some thoughts about that. I think part of that is just the diverging interests of families over time when it comes to private philanthropy, the exponential growth of families, and so fewer and fewer family members are really interested in that part of their family. But set all that aside, you're absolutely right that outsiders can in fact be a negative in a family system. I will also tell you, and I am very certain of this, Angela, that there are outsiders who have helped you be as successful as you've been, that there are third parties who have contributed to your success in ways that not that you couldn't have done it on your own, but that it isn't even imaginable that you could because they've been so integrally involved with that. And so it's an understanding that the power of that third party perspective in the right time, in the right way, through the right mechanism that allow the family to continue to control its legacy, but to get the benefit of all that the value of outside perspective, of outside wisdom that will make them even more effective. And honestly, it all comes down to knowing the family purpose. If the family knows
Yeah.
their purpose, outsiders are there to be a benefit, not a constraint. If the family doesn't, and the family thinks we're just here about wealth preservation, and otherwise I'm going to go do my thing, you really do lose the ability to leverage that the capacity of those outsiders to give you boost, to give you to raise you up as a family. So yes, it can be a blessing, it can be a curse to have great outsiders, but at the end of the day, you should also preserve majority vote for family. So there's
Of
that.
course. Let me ask a couple of maybe more single family office operational type questions. Most family
Yeah,
offices are, I believe, stuck in kind of a reactive loop, uh, meaning you have to understand what's the opposite of reactive. I guess you could say being proactive. If you're only reacting, I don't see that as being excellence. I get it. Things come up. There's goals of the family that you need to do. Not everything is exciting. But if you're not proactively thinking for yourself, thinking of more than just wealth preservation, because inevitably that does fail. Just give it a long enough time horizon. So,
absolutely.
how does a family office, especially a C level or really more of a leader, help to get away from being stuck in a reactive loop and break out of that?
Yeah, it's when a family office becomes defensive in a sense. It's when it's about wealth preservation, not wealth growth. When it's about compliance, it's about just saying yes. It really, you have to be proactive, and each generation has to revisit this and has to recommit to being proactive. And again, this family that I was suggesting that the outsiders really destroyed their family legacy. They preserved the wealth, but they destroyed the legacy. It's tragic because you can't go back and fix that, and it's very difficult to rebuild that. And so it takes, and every family needs to be consistently rigorous around this. Again, this sense of purpose. I know we keep coming back to it, Angela, and I hope it doesn't get too much of a
That's
broken
no, that's
record.
good.
Yeah, I mean, assuming your audience knows what a record is and what a broken record is. But yeah, it's it's really important to to be thoughtful about what it is we are consistently trying to achieve as a family. And again, we talk about the collective family a lot, and that's appropriate when you're talking about family offices and great families. But you also have to talk about the individual family members. And so to break free of that reactive loop, to break free of that of the um, maybe even some of the values of the founder, maybe it's the control of the founder that you've got to break free from. It really requires you to design for evolution, to have a proactive strategy, think about governance refresh cycles. Like that's something we talk about a lot at Banyan. At Banyan, we think, you know what, if you're not going and thinking about that governance on a pretty regular basis, not every year, you don't want to constantly, then it becomes tedious, but you want to be thoughtful about it every 5 years, every 7 years, reflecting on, does this governance still work for us? Is it still achieving what we want to achieve? When we look at our family business, our operating business, is it achieving the goals that we have set out for it? At Banyan, we talk about there are three types of owner strategy. You could think about your operating business about control, growth, and liquidity. And those are all pretty obvious, but they're also trade-offs. You can only have two of three. You can't have all three. And so making sure you as a family are reflecting on that. Has that changed? Should it change? If it does change, how do we evolve our governance to reflect that? When you think about your family office, how are we doing as a family office? You mentioned I have a family member, we'll say, who is a member of a family that is a basically 250 years of American history in his bloodline. And he is a director's descendant of two different families that were signers of the Declaration of Independence, several who were signers of the Constitution, and which is a pretty extraordinary thing. But and at one point, I believe he comes from a family that was the wealthiest family in America, but he did not inherit meaningful money at all. And so he and I have talked about writing a book called When the Money Runs Out, right? I mean, Angela, think about how interesting that book would be. How many families there are who have gotten to that point when the money ran out. And it does happen. All families. It is very unusual to have family, it is far rarer to have family wealth stay. So what do you need to do differently as you think about that? How can you become an enduring family? And I don't like the word dynastic. I do think that has some negative connotations, but I think enduring is extraordinary. And I think about that for my own family. And like you, we're missing a few zeros on our family wealth, but I do think about our family values, and I think about how do those get passed down successfully. Our family, a sense of purpose, a sense of commitment to our friends and our family and our community. Those are the things that my children will inherit from me, since they won't inherit dynastic wealth, right? So I think all of this, the reactive loop, is what you get in when you really refuse to address these topics in a really positive, thoughtful, um, energized way, because you become defensive, protective. You think about compliance. You think about, what if the wealth does run out? Let's make sure we don't, let's preserve cash. It's like, no, you've got to take risks. You've got to really believe in yourself as a family, believe in the potential for the wealth to serve the family. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. In a long enough time horizon, being static or reactive, effectively everything is going to go to zero. It's going to negate. It may take hundreds of years, although likely a lot less. You
Yeah.
always need to be recreating. What you could control is your legacy, the actions that you take, what
Yes.
enters your head, what you think. And again, the actions that you take from that. It's important to recreate from an entrepreneurial perspective. We could save a little more of that discussion for a different time. Thinking a little bit from the role of a family office executive, I need to understand who I am. I need to understand a purpose that I have that relates into culture, leadership, behaviors, and the actions that I take. But I'm not acting in isolation. I have a team. Oh, and by the way, I have a boss, the family, and it might
Yes.
even be even an inconsequential member of the family. Theoretically, could still be enough to get me ousted. So, how do I understand and integrate? If I'm understanding who I am first, my purpose, my culture, my leadership, my behaviors and actions, but that needs to be reflective of, do I know with my employer, the family? How do they think? How do they process information? How does our culture intertwine, knowing that I have to serve them and I'm getting
Right.
properly compensated as such? Uh, Maybe this goes back a little bit to our earlier discussion, but I think it's important to align. And why I'm saying this, I'm going to be very honest with the audience. And I know some of the executives get mad when I say this. The reality, by the law of mathematics, most family offices are average. On a scale of 10, most are going to be a 5. Don't, why would I want to have a family office if it's not going to strive to be great? I'm not saying it's going to be that in a day, a month, or a year, but I want excellence. I want it to be incredible. And what I just described about who am I, about purpose, about leadership, or culture into leadership and how they intertwine, and then the actions that I take, how do I weave that into the culture of the family office and understand that we're similar but different than the actual family? And how do I work within that ecosystem, which could be an eggshell sometimes?
So I'm going to tell you the thing that, if your audience only takes away one thing from this conversation, the one thing that I want them to hear from me is that the biggest failing that a family makes with their family office, the biggest failing, is they see their family office as a cost center and not as a source of strategic value for their family.
Exactly.
Period.
I mean, I love it. I'm obsessed with
You're
SFO.
all in.
I make money by families joining and being a part of it. I
Yes.
mean, I've done
It's
debates, Stephen, where the single family office of excellence is the ultimate in privacy control and customization. And I have
Mhm.
people tell me, well, no, it's not quite as professional. You need outsiders. You need outsiders to do an investment policy statement. And I call poppycock to that. If the family office has the right resources and is striving to be excellent internally, it is the ultimate the ultimate, for lack of a better word, the super rich or those with a legacy. That being said, I have to also face reality, and your experiences, most are not excellent. Therefore, if that is a mandate that you think about, how would you recommend, if you were talking even as a friend over coffee to someone who now has a position of leadership in a family office, what advice would you give them?
It's funny. I actually get that question a lot, Angela. You might not be surprised. Um, my smartass answer is, oh my gosh, run away. But the reality is, it can be an extraordinarily rewarding role, but it is really, really hard. And the first place you need to start is that you need to ensure that your values as an individual, as a human, are consistent with the collective family values of the family that you're working with. Because if they're out of alignment, that lack of alignment, it'll be like a little sand in the gears in the beginning, but over time it becomes a sand dune in the gears. Like you just can't avoid the fact that long term doesn't work. And it's okay. So the first thing I always tell people is be thoughtful about that. The next thing I tell people who want this role is that make sure that you have your diplomacy and therapist hats on much of the time. And again, not because you are a therapist, because you're not. That's offensive to families, frankly. But the truth is, a lot of times you're dealing with family dynamics that can be challenging to navigate. The next thing I'd say is it goes back to our conversation about being a pastor. Being a pastor is about listening. It's just if you can't be a super effective listener, you're never going to be successful. The next thing is understand, and I say this in a kind way, but when you work for a family, you are the help. You
Yes.
are, you are, and it's not a bad thing. You are helping facilitate great families doing things that are extraordinary because of the resources that they have available. And again, with the idea that if the wealth is in service of the family, and you are helping to steward that wealth and steward the purpose of the family on their behalf, what an extraordinary position you're in. Extraordinary. But when things go bad, they can go really bad. Um, I do want to circle back, if I can, Angela, to just this concept of the average family office. I I sit on the advisory board for the Chicago booth, the business school at
Of course.
University of Chicago, on the advisory committee for a new family office initiative that they are leading.
Mhm.
And the idea is to create a pipeline of talent for the family office world. And the reason I'm on this advisory committee, and there are about 8 of us on this, is because I believe deeply that there is a dearth of great talent in family offices. The reason I think there's a lack of talent is because I think too many families see it as a cost center. And so they're
Yes,
not willing to develop the talent they need. They're not willing to invest in the talent that will really make these family offices great. And I do believe a great family office is a superpower for a family. It is a tool for really ensuring that these families have multi-generational success, that they thrive on a multi-generational basis. That's what a great family office can be. I also will tell you that I tell a lot of families don't have a family office. I
absolutely.
say, interesting, right? I say, you don't want to have a Stephen. I'm a pain in the ass. I mean, I just am. And the reason is because I'm an individual. I'm not a family member. I am going to bring my own values to the table. I'm going to bring my own talent and capabilities. Now, well managed, I can be an extraordinary resource, but it's hard. It takes time and effort. And a family office, if a family office, I talk about it as the yacht effect. If your family office is just something to show off, like when you're golfing with your buddies to say, hey, I got a call from my family office president, like, don't do it. If you really see your family office as a strategic asset for your family to create extraordinary outcomes for your family, then go all in. But just understand it is a commitment. It's a really big commitment. How do you find the best talent? It's hard. How do you develop that talent over time? It's hard. How do you make sure that family office is successful? That's even harder. How do you measure the success of a family office? Oh, geez, Angela, you and I could probably have a 3-hour conversation on that single topic alone, because it's
Because
not
much of
just
it,
investment performance.
for the audience that is not as familiar, outside of investment performance, really practically everything else is somewhat qualitative. I'm even going to state to some degree, taxes and estate planning, because
Mhm.
until that's challenged, or until the death decades later of a family member, you almost really don't know. There's a level of art and science to that as well. But a lot of it comes down to, but Angelo, I think I'm doing a good job. I'm quantifying this and that. I'm like, how does the family feel about you? Because if you have one influential family member that is not feeling you in a good way, I don't think it's going to work out long term for you. And that's on you
Absolutely.
to figure out that issue and help address it. How do you make the family feel qualitatively, or how do they feel qualitatively about you? And so a lot of that has nothing to do with numbers and metrics.
No. And that gets to that, we talked very early, you made a comment about vision and it being soft in families. I will disagree with you. I think a vision is actually important. If you do have a vision correctly, it can be very important because to me, a vision is time bound. And within that vision should be very clear success metrics. And investment performance is one of them. But even that can create
Sure.
conflict. I think about families who, you know, um, when they think about their wealth, at least some of that wealth is going to go into investments that they know is not going to drive top quartile performance, but they do it because they've got other reasons for doing it, other really good reasons to do it. Maybe they're investing in their companies in their hometown because they want to make sure that they're creating the next generation of great businesses in their hometown. That's awesome, but that doesn't generate necessarily top quartile returns. That might be, average returns. It might even be below average returns. But it's really important because we're measuring this in another way, which is how do we build a great community around us? Well, that then tends to start to uh, put you and the investment professionals uh, in maybe not conflict, but definitely having different expectations of what we're trying to accomplish. So that can be hard. So even investment performance, as you said, is not always clear. And tax of performance. Oh my gosh, Angela, one of my favorite examples to share with people about taxes. Um, when you're a tax lawyer, your job is to create extraordinary opportunities to reduce your tax, right? Whether through estate planning, through corporate entity structuring, whatever. That's your job. And so there's a family member that I had as a client who was sitting at a table with me and went quiet for a moment when I asked her, what is it that she was hoping for her children? A question that is always a great question to ask to really understand what a family is looking for. It's like, what are your hopes and aspirations for your children? All of whom were late teens, so they weren't quite young adults, but they were, not young children either. And she said, you know what, Stephen, I screwed up. When I started this job, where she was wildly successful, her lawyer told her to put most of her stock options and stock positions into trusts in benefit of her children that were irrevocable. And she said, if I had any idea what would have happened with that stock, I never would have done it. I didn't have any intention for my children to have that much wealth. Um, uh, and there's nothing I can do about it today. Absolutely nothing. Because the lawyer didn't ask her, what is it that your hopes and aspirations for your children? The lawyer just said, here's the most tax efficient way to pass your assets down. And he was right. Unfortunately, the consequences of that is that she was then put in a position that was not in any way aligned with her vision and values for her family. And so, really being thoughtful about that is so critically important. And the best family offices, again, start with purpose so that they know how to build their investment policies, their investment portfolios, and to do the asset allocation. They know how to use private equity and private credit and private investments as um, as an allocation because of the long-term capital commitments and the tax deferrals, but that creates these extraordinary outcomes long term. They know how to use the right trust and estate lawyers to build trust and estate that map to their values. They know how to build out the other family services that make sense. If you put a kid on a private jet from age 1, you have to understand that you can't then say we're only going to give our kid $1 million as when they come of age, because like Warren Buffett says, I want them to have enough money to do anything, but not enough money, not so much money that they do nothing. And it's like, well, you can't do that to a kid. You know, it's like you've got to be thoughtful about all this stuff. It's so a great family office helps a family be intentional in a way that creates, again, long-term multi-generational family success. That's how I think about it. But how do you measure that? I haven't figured it out, Angela. So if you've got the answer,
Right.
I'm totally open.
I know. I hear you. Been in it for decades as well, and that's going to vary depending on family. And anything that's qualitative is again hard to measure, other than how do you feel or how does the family feel.
Yeah.
That leaves it subjectives to people's emotions and feelings, even in the moment, and that's potentially a risk of someone who's a little bit more right-brained and a little bit more logic
Yes.
thinking as opposed to the reality of emotions. A couple of things pop to mind given your experiences at two iconic family offices. Well, one is a comment. The best family offices, of course, you'll feel this way, Stephen, because they hired you. The best family offices often do one thing brilliantly. Again, family offices. Let's ignore the family dynamics for a second. How about this? It's actually moderately simple. They hire brilliantly, which means you're going to have
Hmm.
to properly recruit, motivate, well, to a degree, they should be self motivated, retain, and compensate. And
Yes.
sometimes, again, they look at it as a cost center. I would almost go a little overly out of my way. If you hire brilliantly and reward success, it's almost hard on at least the quantitative aspects of the family office for that family office to fail. Uh, what I would do in terms of a senior leader is how about remove bottlenecks? If I have incredible people, but they're bogged down by something that either they're overwhelmed by, they can't solve, my job as a more senior person is we have a goal. How's your progress on that goal? And what bottleneck is holding you back that I want to help you on? Do you look at, and I know I'm talking Peter Drucker, Jim Collins 101 here, yet shockingly, I've been doing this for decades. Almost every family office falls trap to the challenges of not quite understanding the goals and tracking the progress on those goals without being overbearing. Although sometimes I do think you need daily check ins. We could save that a little bit for later. But how about I have incredible people and damn it, I remove their bottlenecks? Do we have to make it harder? Like, that's actually an important thing you could do.
Well, it's funny. I do love that definition of great leadership is I am there when I'm needed. I always often talk about I've been CEO in several different organizations, and I say my goal is to make as few decisions as humanly possible as
I
CEO,
like it.
right? And the reason is because if you've got a great team, they're making the decisions, they're getting stuff done. They know what the point on the horizon is that we're all trying to achieve collectively. But in order to know the point on the horizon, you've got to work on what is the point on the horizon. You've got to define it. You've got to measure it. That's where I think vision is so important. Even when we think about Banyan, and it's funny, I'm now a partner at Banyan, and I'm the newest partner, and it is really important for me as the newest partner at Banyan to have real clarity about what's our vision as an organization. What do we want to achieve as Banyan? And so I talked to the partners and I said, we have to do the same thing for ourselves that we ask our clients to do for their family offices. And we have to set that point on the horizon. What will we be at our 25th anniversary? What does it look like? What does success look like? How do we measure that success? That's the thing that I think is super important. Now, I'm going to have a slightly different perspective, and I actually think it's additive. It's not in conflict with this concept of helping clear bottlenecks, helping solve the hardest problems. Because if you ask me, what's my favorite thing to do in an organization? There's nothing more I love than getting in a room with really smart people on a really hard problem and collaborating to come up with great solutions. That's like nirvana to me. Nirvana. I love it. I love a whiteboard. Right now, that being said, I have a slightly nuanced view, which is I hire a number of people. My job is to get each of those individuals to achieve their full potential. Because if every single member of my team is operating at their full potential, that just gives extraordinary lift to the whole team. So what do you need to do that? That's a sounds good. How do I do it? Number one, you have to be really, really mindful of what is the full potential of each person on your team. What can they achieve? And how do I think about that? So we do a 9-box exercise. And the 9-box is, what is their performance and what's their potential? And if I think their performance is strong, but their potential is, I kind of think of it as they could be potentially promoted 2 steps above where they are today. That gets you in the upper right-hand quadrant. You don't want the entire team up there. That's too much, right? That's everybody wants to be promoted and nobody wants to just do the work. And so you actually need people who are strong performers, who are exactly where they should be. That's the bottom right. And I call those the boulders, the people who just are the foundation of the team. I had some people on my team with the Waltons, some tax accountants who were unbelievable, just so valuable. So what do you do with them? Well, you make sure that you compensate them. They sometimes make more money than their boss. Why? Because they're so important in what they do. Those are the kinds, that's the mindset, is if I've got someone who's operating at their full potential, but their full potential is the position they're in, I think that's awesome. But if I have somebody who is a mediocre performer and doesn't have much potential, you better believe that I'm going to work on either helping them become that full potential or helping them find another role somewhere else that's going to be a better fit for them. And I am a huge believer. You're not firing people. You're giving people the opportunity to find a role that is a better fit for them. And I have had to terminate many people in my career. There are some who do not like me, but most are thankful that they were able to get out of an organization where they weren't getting the what they needed to achieve their full potential and found something that they did. That's the power of great leadership, is to build an organization where everybody's operating at their full potential. And honestly, there's nothing you as an organization can't do at that point, Angelo. And then when you're solving those bottlenecks, when you're solving those hardest problems and you get people in the room, oh my gosh, that's just, again, nirvana.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with solving problems, and effectively, problems are endless. There'll always be problems.
Yes. Well,
I
I
look
call
at
that, you know what that is, Angelo? That's
ah,
that's just that's just, job security for you and me.
well, I've looked at in my experiences, although I like to talk bad things often about attorneys, I do have to admit, a little bit like the Harvey Specter character on Suits. I look at him less as being a attorney and more as being, I have a really big problem. I think I want you to be legal how you deal with it, although Harvey would stretch the boundaries a little bit, but I want you to make my problems go away. I generally find that attorneys at an extremely high level, and often tax attorneys, high IQ, applied intelligence, resilience, resourceful, obsessed, and actually those are traits I would look for in employees. In the family office, it's a little more nuanced with communication,
Mhm.
emotional intelligence, etc.
Yes,
So
yes,
it could
yes.
vary. But potentially, the people that I described, if they're a little bit, well, it depends. In a small family office, one person like that could challenge things, but maybe they're more remote. Maybe it's a larger structure, they're a little more isolated. But that would go into a deep discussion about, again, hiring, firing, what we're looking for. I'm going to give a little bit of a different switch. I've adapted my opinion more so in the last 2 years. I used to be a big advocate of best practices, and I
Mhm.
still am at the highest level. But here's my little catch to that. If I'm a typical family office that's not active with people like you and even me and others, I may not know what I don't know. Oh, so best practices, I'm going to compare to other family offices. One, what are the goals of that family and family office relative to your family and family office? Geography, size, generations in the family. And rather bluntly, going back to what I said earlier, what makes you think the comparison that you're doing, that you're probably in an echo chamber on and don't want to hear other perspectives, but just looking to reinforce your own thinking, what makes you think that they're any good,
Yeah,
let alone great? So
yeah.
I think best practices at an extremely targeted level are valuable. Don't get me wrong. But I've come to become, pardon the bad English, more of a believer in first principles. I want to break
Yes.
down everything like, God, it's almost a bad name to bring up these days. I don't know why, but like Elon Musk on SpaceX and building rockets. I don't want to copy what the government did. I want to understand why a rocket would cost me 55 million. Let me break it down to its components. Oh, it's like really 5 million. Uh, I look at family offices more so in the last 2 years as I've evolved and sold Family Office Association and I consult. Best practices have some value. First principles always have incredible value. You are at very high levels in Walton and Gates. What is your perspective on what I just said?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it has to go back to first principles. And one of the first principles is a very clear purpose. And I think a very well articulated vision, because that becomes the North Star that everybody points to. And what is a North Star? A North Star is just something against which you can measure the decisions you make. It's, I like to think about, I actually learned quite a bit when I was at Banyan Company early in my career. And we had a set of operating principles. There were 10 operating principles. And we all knew them. One of which was in my, frankly, well, I'll tell you the one that we should all be thinking of is presumed trust. That was one of our operating principles. And we would hold each other accountable to those operating principles. We would think about issues in with that operating principle mindset, which is I've got to presume trust. And presuming trust means that you just assume that people are acting out of a place of integrity and trustworthiness. Now, are they always doing that? They're not. But you know what? As a human, I am better off presuming trust. And so when somebody says something, I'm going to presume that they're coming from a place of integrity. So yes, all of those things are really important. Those first principles to understand what is it that we're in here to do together. And a lot of family offices, as you know, Angela, are really small. They might be 3 people, they might be 5 people. The family members may outnumber the family office. Those are great family offices too, but they're going to do things differently. And they're going to do things in a way that makes the most sense for that family. So I agree with you on this concept of best practices. To me, think of it this way. If I regain vision, but all I can see is black or white and nothing gray, then all I ever see is black and white. So it's all binary. But if somebody introduces the concept of gray to me, that then changes my perspective. In a way, that's what a best practice does. It comes into your worldview to say, here's a different way of doing it, which doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way for you. But at least it triggers in you this critical thinking mindset, which is, oh gosh, if I could do it this way, might also do it this way, or this way, or this way. All circling back to with the idea that we have these first principles in mind: our purpose, our vision, our operating principles, are the way that we do things. So yeah, I totally agree with you. I think benchmarking is important, but it is a tool in the toolbox. It is absolutely not to be. If somebody said, Stephen, I want to copy what you did with Walton Enterprises for my family, I'd say that's a lousy idea. A lousy idea. I mean, truly. But I'd love to help you think about what makes sense from what I did there to help you create an extraordinary family office for your family. That would be fun.
Exactly. We have about 30 more minutes left with Stephen. And yes, we're going to get to some of Angelo's crazy questions, I promise. And some of you, by the way, you could feel free to ask questions. I believe I might have messed up the time in the webinar for 3 o'clock Eastern. So sadly, if you signed up, you may have to simply get the recording, which will be great. Just email me and I'll get that to you ASAP. But I know some of you like to interact. And if you are live, you're able to do that, please do. Right before we go to our final 30 minutes on next gen, on AI, a little bit of investing, and some other family office best practice. I can't use that word, practice management type things. Just a little bit of a note. Again, everyone, I've been away for a couple of weeks, traveling in the West Coast, meeting with incredible families, learning so much, and extremely active with my private membership community, which now is heading into year 2. We're marching towards 100 incredible families and single family offices, and really focused on unique proprietary content. I've been in the community for a long time. I'm an active allocator myself. I've created out of Wyoming my family office structures. I'm kind of converting to an AI family office. We'll talk more about that upcoming in the spring. And I've been living through it, traveling the world, meeting with incredible families. I do have a respect for others and other communities within quote unquote the space. And I've been a part of it for decades. But I think what I'm doing now, strategically, intellectually, is very, very unique. And yes, one of you sent a note, Angelo, how could you go an hour and a half in an interview and not really bring up geopolitics, macroeconomics, or investing and AI? Like I don't know. This is like a first time ever for me, but see, I'm more diverse than many of you think. And these deeper thinking issues of structure and family dynamics and challenges and the history of family offices are all things that fascinate me. If you want to be part of something that is different, that is special, that is more intense and personal, and meet incredible families around the world. I'm in Palm Beach, Miami, Greenwich, New York, Vienna, Cayman Islands, Jackson Hole, LA. I'll be there for the Milken Conference hosting 2 programs. You have to join. You have to see the value in deeper strategy and intellectual insight and peer connectivity. If you want to go for free to conferences, you're going to get what you kind of should get, to be honest with you, probably wasting your time. So go to angelorobles.com, go to membership and join. We're in a very fortunate mode, having done very well this year, but still looking to grow with the right families. Stephen, in continuing, I promised I would come back to what you noted probably a good hour ago relative to the rising generation.
Yes.
Could I make a comment that the current model, and I'm being a little vague with that because I want you to interpret it in your own way. The current model is failing the rising generation. I'm making that too much yes or no. There's nuances there. How would you dig into that perspective?
I failing is maybe too strong a word, but I love the question. What I think is happening is what happens every every major generational transition, probably in the history of mankind. There probably was they were having the same issue when the older generation was all gung ho on bow and arrows, and the younger generation said no, 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 we've discovered gunpowder, right? It's like it just will always be thus. I think one of the things that I have tried to stay as a 55-year-old is as curious as I was as a 7-year-old. And Angela, one of the things I see in you and that you and I share, which is one of the reasons I was so excited about this conversation, is you share that same curiosity. If you have curiosity, it means that you don't get stale in your beliefs. It means that you're thinking about AI and how AI can change the world. And I have a really interesting, once we get onto that topic, I have a really interesting thing that I did with my family that I'm looking forward to sharing. But let's talk specifically about this concept of next generation. Well, let's be clear. The next generation craves purpose. They crave transparency. They crave agency for themselves, right? And of course they do. We are in an environment now where we have said to generations of Americans, you can do anything you set your mind to. That is not a thing that you would have heard in the 19th century, right? I mean, let's be clear. It's like you can do anything so long as you stay in this particular job in this particular location and you never spend a minute of your life beyond 10 miles from where you were born. That's that that's not the today. And so if the family office is a black box, if it is opaque, it's centralized, it's high control, it's slow moving, you're not going to adapt to that next generation. And what are they going to do? They're going to run away. They're going to say, I need more freedom, flexibility, and agency. Let's figure out, how do we make sure that the family office is thoughtful in working with the family, right? At the end of the day, the family office is the families. Working with the families to say, how do we ensure that this family office is meeting the needs of your generation and the next generation? And one of the things that's so important is for the older generation to step back to allow the younger generation to step up. And I can't tell you how many families I've seen where the older generation, they might have gotten kind of control and governance in their 20s and 30s, but it refused to give it up until their 70s and 80s. And you know what I call that? The Prince Charles problem. And think about how think about how destructive that is.
I'm gonna have to steal that one from you. Thank you.
Please do. I mean, it's a it's one of those things where if you really want that your platform, your family office to be there for the next generation, you have to think about being open. Again, you have to think about that purpose because they crave that purpose. You've got to make sure that the governance model gives them opportunity. I think about next generation a lot because I just think like I said, that 29 generation family in Europe, their number one top concern was next generation development. And so I think about developing the next generation in three phases. You give them um, exposure, then experience, then empowerment. Exposure, experience, empowerment. Too many families leap from you know nothing about what's going on to suddenly you now have a very significant role and you're empowered to make decisions. Well, that doesn't make sense, right? I mean, that's like throwing a kid in a stick shift car who's only driven electric and said, go, good luck. Like that ain't gonna happen. So what do? You give them exposure. Should the exposure start? As young as possible. How do you use a family meeting? A family meeting is a place to learn and practice decision making, right? That exposure is so important. Board observer roles are so important. Go observe the board. Don't say a word. Your job is literally to observe. Then you start giving them some experience. Maybe you work in the company, the operating business. Maybe you work in the foundation. Maybe you go do, maybe you go work for another family's family office, which can be so powerful, right? Because then, I mean, think about best practice. I work for another family's family office, and then I bring that back to my family.
Wow. Yeah,
How
that's
cool is
great.
that, right? I think more families should be doing that. What do they call that in business? Uh, I can't remember. There were some times early in my career where businesses used to do that. They used to essentially have the opportunity to go work. Well, Bain did that. You could go work for some of your clients for a period of time just to get that experience. Unbelievable, mind blowing, changes your worldview. Other people do things differently. What? Right? So that's experience, and then of course empowerment. And when do you give them empowerment? That is it was one of the great questions of all time. Some of the greatest leaders of in the history of corporations, in the history of civilizations, have been, gotten that leadership role at age 25 and been extraordinary. Others, you have the Prince Charles problem, and you don't get it until you're in your 60s or 70s. I don't know that there's a perfect answer to empowerment. I think it's probably a lot to do with the individual themselves, but a lot of it is to do with how do you give them empowerment that grows over time and not instantly gives them everything. And I know two different families very, very well because I sit on the board of two family businesses, which is one of the most extraordinary privileges to be able to sit as an independent board member. And the one of the businesses, the board I sit on, the patriarch of the family is 94 years old. He joined the family business at age 17. At age 25, his father, who founded the business, came into the office of the family business, took his keys, put them on the desk, and said, "The business is yours." Think about that. At age 25, the business is yours. At age 94, on January 1 of this year, he stepped down from being the board chair.
Yeah.
Think about that. It's extraordinary. And yet, in his particular case, he was great. He did the same thing for his children as he gave them the opportunity to be in significant leadership positions at a relatively young age. But I know another family, almost identical story, and the next generation has the scion of the family, the G2, has kept total control, has given his children none of it. And it's like, well, didn't you know, didn't you get some of that control? Actually, you got all that control in your 20s. In his case, he was a little bit older, but I think he was 28 or 29. You got that control, but why don't you give it to your children? Like it's almost hypocrisy. I hate to say it that way, but it is. And so I think there's so many amazing stories where young people took that ownership, and because of the confidence that parents had in them, they built extraordinary things. Um, and so I think sooner is better. And I think empowering people so that they grow in that empowerment, maybe have a junior board, for a foundation, a junior board for a family office. Maybe you have a committee that they can sit on for the family board operating business. How do you give them those opportunities to learn how to make decisions? How do you give them the opportunity, Angelo, to fail so that
Ah,
they can learn from those
indeed.
failures? you know and everybody wants their kid to never fail. Like I think that's a little bit of the problem of our generation of parenting, is we never wanted our kid to skin their knee. It's like, no, they got to skin their knee. They got to get the cut underneath their chin, go get stitches at the hospital. I've got mine. Every kid had it back then. um that's what our I think we're a little bit missing, is giving our kids the opportunity to have agency, to make decisions, to see when those decisions are successful and not. So as I think about rising generation, there's so much to it. And again, that's another 3-hour discussion. But the starting point is understand that whatever it is that motivates you, whatever your values are, you need to assume that your children do not have that same thing. And so you need to learn, listen, engage, to allow them to get exposure, experience, and then empowerment. Does that make sense?
It does. You kind of answered it there. I'm going to ask a question relative to that in a little bit of a unique way. Yeah, I got about 30 more questions. We're not going to have the time for that. We'll definitely do a part two later in the year, but I think we got time probably for 6 or 7 more. So, building upon what you just said, I'm going to reverse it a little bit. What are most rising generation leaders getting wrong, and how can they lead more with credibility?
Oh, um, what are they getting wrong? I so when you said what are the rising leaders getting wrong, or what are the current leaders getting wrong?
Yeah, no, younger, next gen,
Okay.
rising
Oh,
gen.
yeah,
That
yeah.
could
Oh,
be
so even
misleading. Like you said, I could be 70 years old and be a rising generation in the family,
yeah.
but I think I'm implying people that are probably 30, 35 and under.
What are they getting wrong? Oh boy, you know, I think they not understanding how difficult it is to steward wealth. Um, and in a sense, and again, like I actually tell people, great families don't steward their wealth. Great families steward their purpose,
Ah, love it.
right? Stewarding wealth almost feels like passive, and honestly, it's not that exciting and interesting. Like, you can steward wealth by putting all of your wealth in an S&P 500 ETF and just go sailing. And sometimes great families should do that. Like, that's
You
okay.
probably, after 20, 30 years, you're probably beat most active managers, but that's a
I
different
know.
story.
Yes. So exactly. So I would say a few things. One is, like any 25, 35-year-old person, they think their parents know nothing. And, I will tell you, I I had parents. We all had parents. I am I am more, conscious of how smart my parents were now than I was back then. Right? I thought I knew everything. And you're there. What is it that Mark Twain says? There's, nothing like a 21-year-old who's, they think they're the smartest person in the world. Like, I wish I were 21 when I knew everything. Um, there's something to that. Like, there's something to that confidence and the cockiness and the arrogance of a 21-year-old who thinks they know everything. But what I would tell rising leaders is the same thing I'm telling family office leaders, the same thing I'm telling the G1s, that it's the same thing as a pastor, that I think is so critically important, is listen, 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 right? Listen, learn, engage. Um, I think they are probably underestimating, honestly, just how in what a moment of transformation we're about to hit. And I
Yes,
think you
we're going to get to
you
that.
yeah, I know you instinctively get that. I don't know that everybody does, Angelo.
Oh,
I
no,
really don't.
no. And 95% of family offices either don't get it or don't want to get it. They have
Yeah.
their head in the sand.
Yes. So that's a rising gen issue. I think having um, trust and faith in the older generation. We talk sometimes at Banyan about, again, in the context of governance, because we're really focused on governance, leadership, ownership. the wisdom council. Have you ever heard this concept of a wisdom council?
No.
Because the concepts of a wisdom council is you have your family council, right? So that could be all family members. It could be subset of family members. It could have spouses. It might not have spouses. A wisdom council is very specifically the oldest members of the family are part of the wisdom council. And the idea of the wisdom council is they don't necessarily have decision-making authority over anything specific, but they're an available resource for the family as they're making the big decisions. And so it's saying, I don't necessarily want to put all the decisions just with the oldest members of the family, but I want to treat them as this extraordinary resource, a treasure for the family to learn from their experience, to learn from the accumulation of things that they have seen, felt, heard, witnessed over their lifespan. That, I think, is so powerful. It's also really hard as, I'm 55. I still think, gosh, really? But more and more I realize, no, that would be, think about all of the civilizations all over the world for the last, 5,000 years, where the elders were revered. One of the problems with the American culture, and America has so many extraordinary traits. This is one of its weaknesses, is we have forgotten the value of our elders. And so the Wisdom Council is to say, no, there is treasure in our elders that we should be tapping into as we make decisions as a family. So that's something I would also think about. It's I do think so much about the next generation, about how do you teach them and train them, but I haven't thought about that question that you raised. So this is all kind of coming off real time, but I think it's one worth really continuing to probe, Angela. I think there's something there to how will they fail? Like, what are the things that we can help to make sure that they are successful, both structurally, but also individually?
Of course. And when we do get a little bit in the final 3 or 4 minutes, a little bit to AI, among the audiences I deal with,
3 or 4 minutes.
well, I mean, I want to give it 3 hours, but
Yeah.
my audience hears me talk enough about AI, so I want to cover some different subjects. But what I was getting to is the over 40 and principals and older generational family
Yeah.
members and often executives, they honestly don't get it. Although I sometimes have my disagreements with the rising generation for some of the reasons why I asked that question and your comments, they may not even like me, but they get it. When I talk about that, like it's native to them. They're nuanced to it. But we'll get a little bit to that. But one thing where I sometimes disagree with them on, maybe I'm wearing my grouchy old man Wyoming roots a little bit now. I promised you I'd come back to impact. We really only have 2 or 3 minutes for it because I got a couple of other questions.
Yeah.
I'm sometimes a little sensitive to that word. Like, what does that
Yes.
mean? I'm an impact investor. I'm doing good from a societal perspective. But who's determining that? Is it fair to other family members if you're managing capital relative to not optimizing returns? Then you could do with your money what you want to do with it. So, and again, I know I'm making more enemies than friends. Welcome to Angelo's world. But I'm not always the most sympathetic to the word impact investing. Prove me wrong.
Here, I'm going to help you out if that's okay.
Okay, please.
I'm going to help broaden your perspective of how to think about impact in a way that I think you can take that. I like to think of it as jujitsu. Take that energy and reflect it back in a positive way, because that's the power of a great family office head. That's the power of a great family office patriarch and leader. Is how do you magnify the positive energy and diminish the negative energy? I think about impact as not just we used to say ESG. Then we said, gosh, there's so many different acronyms that have come out, but um, DEI was a little bit of impact, right? Set all that aside. When I worked with the Waltons, one of the things that we talked about and really at length was the fact that their greatest source of impact was Walmart, right? So if you think about great
Yes.
families and you redefine what does impact mean, it's not just the philanthropy, it's not just the grant making, right? That's important. I've got lots and lots of thoughts about foundations. The fact that they can't get beyond third generation. Why? Should we even have a foundation? Should we think about our giving differently? Should I do a DAF rather than a private foundation that requires a 990 form to be filled out and reveal everything to the world. Like, how do I think about that? Should it be an operating foundation or should it be just a grant making foundation, right? That kind of impact is so limited. If I think about how do we have an impact as a family, and I'm the Rockefellers, and I've got 250 family members who have been taught from the minute they were born about how to be a Rockefeller, which was how to be a leader, and they go out to the community and they pursue their life with this idea, this identity of being a Rockefeller and being a leader. That's extraordinary, right? That's not an impact investment per se, but that's how we have impact. The operating business, how does that operating business have impact? You hire people, you pay them fairly, and they go out in their communities and are create great communities. You have customers that you're meeting their needs and making their lives better through whatever service you're providing. You've got potentially outside shareholders if you just have a controlling stake and not a 100% ownership. Like, again, just think about other ways we have impact. How do we create an environment within which we achieve our purpose? That to me is impact. If I'm achieving my purpose, then I'm having impact. If I specifically want to invest in things, in like use our capital to invest in investments that are that will have below market returns, because I believe that's important, there's something important about that particular investment, that's great. Just do it in the context of what we are trying to create as a family overall. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and so many other billionaires have signed the Giving Pledge and made a commitment to deploy at least half their resources in grant making capacity. That's awesome. That's one way to have impact. But there's so many others. That's the redefinition that I would urge you to consider when you're talking to this next gen who says, I want to make impact. Awesome. Let's think about the different ways you can do that, and let's go do it. That I don't know if that's a helpful reframing for you at all.
No, that's helpful. When I replay and watch my own video, definitely going to take a note on that. I think that's a wonderful perspective. This goes back a little bit to operational issues and communication. Kind of what I like to say is there's almost two operating systems. The family is often, going back to some JU's thoughts here, tribal. We could say inclusive. Yep. I could argue emotional. The family office could be more performance driven, corporate. Let's go with the word task oriented. So what do you do when you have two different OS or operating systems and they don't talk to each other? Then what I call the brand starts to break down. And I know we're going back to what we led with, but I think this again goes back to purpose, communication, understanding that you are an employee. You do have a boss within the family office, and you need to sometimes check yourself and, understand those nuances. And this, why I keep on pounding this issue is because you've known hundreds of family offices. I've known hundreds, yet somehow practically all of them make this same mistake over and over.
Absolutely. It's we talk about family systems. Jay Hughes, by the way, is another like Dennis Jaffe, just extraordinary luminaries in this space. And if you think about when Jay and Dennis were kind of our age, the family office world was a much more opaque, more black box. You just didn't talk about it. And so I think of Jay Hughes as being, I've had a chance to meet him a couple of times, which has been pretty extraordinary. But I think of him as a mentor and role model, even if I'm not close to him. And he really did think about some of these issues. Was doing some of the deep thinking, long before you and I were.
Indeed.
The operating system of a family office, it better be in alignment with the operating system of the family system, or surplus, to use a technical term. It just has to be. And when it gets out of alignment, you feel it very, very quickly. And this goes back to my comment about the fact that a family office is a co-op, right? You've got the owners of the customers. And that's, there are great REI, great Seattle business. I'm in Seattle, for those who are wondering what's outside the window here. One of the great businesses of the last 25 years. And it's a co-op. It's been very, very successful. You can have the owners be the customers. But when the owners and the customers get out of alignment, in the sense that what the system is doing on behalf of the operating system, on behalf of the family office, isn't meeting the customers' needs, who are also the owners, You got a problem, and you've got to solve that fast, and you've got to understand what it is that is out of alignment and get it back in alignment. As a family office head, as the non-family member who is leading a family office, I thought about that every single day. Every day. There was not a day that I wasn't thinking about, are we meeting the needs of the family? Are we helping them achieve their purpose? I knew, because we had a very clear mission, very, very clear. I talked about every meeting I had with our team. I started with the mission of our family office. And the mission of the family office was not the same mission as the family, but the mission of the family office better be in service of the mission of the family, or it will fail. So how do you think about that? Is you look at what you are accomplishing as a family office and say, is the set of things that we're accomplishing in service of what the family needs, what their aspirations are, what their purpose is, and what their vision is as a family? And when it's not, step back and say, how do we get it back into alignment? And that can be, are we offering services we should be or not be? Are we supporting them in the way they need? Are we getting feedback from the family that suggests that we are, falling short of their expectations? All of that's important. And it goes back to what you just said, communications, not surprisingly. So yeah, I think the operating systems need to be in alignment, but they are different. As you said, and they shouldn't be the same.
I've been thinking through and asking this question to families lately. If your family lost, maybe more so for the family than the family office, but lost 90% of its wealth tomorrow, would your family office still matter?
Hmm.
And they
Interesting.
all have different answers for that, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and there are some families that could lose 90% of their wealth and still have extraordinary wealth, but others where that would, they would fall beneath that. Um, yeah, that's a really interesting question. I would imagine that should, there's an exercise that I've done with, businesses that have nothing to do with family offices, where you say, what could kill this business? Right. And so thinking through the set of things that could kill it, because that then gives you the opening to say, well, what do we do to prevent those things from happening? And I guess that's just one of those things that could kill a family office, is if the wealth drops by 90%. And you then, I think, should have the question of, well, if you have $1 billion, you're down to 100 billion, 100 million. Does it make sense to have a family office at 100 million? And the answer is probably not, right? So that then says, all right, well, how do we ensure that the family doesn't drop to 100 million? Right? That the downside of that, though, is like, well, I don't want to be a wealth preservation, wealth conservation, because then the choices that I make aren't necessarily going to be the ones that actually help create extraordinary families, which is more about wealth growth than it is about wealth preservation. And by the way, just a little, sideline comment. I think the private wealth management industry has done such a disservice by talking about wealth preservation, because nobody should be all about wealth preservation. Nobody. Because when you're at wealth preservation, you're destroying family wealth over time.
100%.
Yes.
If
Okay.
nothing else, the impact of inflation for you as a wealthy
Yes.
family, taxation, distributions.
Family
I've been
growth.
talking about that for decades. I get called an idiot, but you could
No.
say it, Stephen, and of course, it's going to help my case. So
Yes.
bring it on.
Yes. You're a genius, Angelo. You're a genius.
It's not coming out of my mouth. What can I say?
Yes. Yes. No, I think wealth preservation destroys family wealth over time, period.
That could be our clip and our takeaway.
Yes.
Just so I know, there's 6 minutes to the top of the hour. If you have a hard stop, I get it. Could you have an extra 3 to 5 minutes?
I can have an extra 3 to 5 minutes. Yes.
Okay. So I basically only have 2 questions left. One
Okay.
is going to start off as a comment, but I want you to, it'll delve into a question. I could almost imagine you're in the room there back in the day with the Waltons or the Gates and your family office people. And imagine this cowboy with a beard from Wyoming is talking about most wealth holders believe their structures will endure. Now, in a long enough timeline, effectively everything goes to zero. But I'm going to argue most family offices were built for a world that no longer exists. Geopolitical tensions, wars, economic turbulence challenges we're having here in the US, both from a societal and people, as well as monetary, and a whole bunch of issues going on. Lots of things that could very much or very well go wrong, and the relentless march of AI. So I'm going to argue the traditional family office model is becoming obsolete. It was designed for stability, not really control. It manages wealth, but like what we just said, is it manufacturing opportunity in a world that's in chaos? And I just
Mhm.
don't see other people in the family office world talking about that. I've had multiple people on podcasts I'm a guest on. Angelo, I'm not going to ask you a geopolitical question. I think it's too sensitive. You're very opinionated, and it may be offensive to some of our viewers and watchers. Like, really? Like, I'm not going to use bad language. And I admit I have biases like everyone else. I'm imperfect, but I'm a pretty deep thinker, I'd like to hope, and think about these things more than I think others do. Oh, but our family's going to be wealthy, what, forever? Well, did Rome feel that way? Did
Mhm.
Napoleon take on too many wars? How about the French Revolution? How about the Russian Revolution? What happens to the super rich? I mean, I'm going to use a nice word. They were kind of eliminated. uh,
Ah,
so I mean, I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes
yeah.
before we switch to AI, but I'm going to give that hardball to you.
I love that question. You know, it's a I am an optimist, and I was born that way. My mother called me Susie Sunshine when I was younger, and don't ask me why it was Susie Sunshine and not Stephen Sunshine, but whatever. Um, but I have been optimistic probably since the day I came out of the womb, and I remain optimistic today. Which doesn't mean I'm not a realist, which doesn't mean I'm not pragmatic and understand that what's happening geopolitically is pretty extraordinary. But I'll also say it's not the first time in history. The Chinese civilization is 5,000 years old. There's a family that I mentioned earlier that's in their 99th generation. There's a European family that is in the 29th generation. Japanese families, many of them are in their dozen plus generations. Many family owned businesses are still family owned in their that are 1,000 years old, and they have lived through very significant transformations geopolitically. It is possible to do that. Are we at the Great Filter? And I'm sure you're familiar with the Great Filter, but the Great Filter is this concept that evolution runs along, hits a wall and stops and can't get past that wall. And that's why there is not a sophisticated um, civilization outside of Earth in somewhere in the universe. The Great Filter is a really interesting concept. I could certainly come up with a reason to believe that we might be getting very close to the Great Filter, where it would literally be the decimation of our
Well,
of
that
humankind.
That is correct. And that's where potentially AI, enhanced human capabilities, and a whole bunch of other things that we're only
Yes,
going to have 3 or 4 minutes to talk about, but
yes,
where that is
but
going to be
yes,
impactful to where you're going.
yes. So I will tell you, I will disagree with you. I work with a lot of families. I think a lot of families are thinking about this. I don't know that they know what to do. I don't know that there is a best practice
Come to
to
Angelo. I
just
got you covered.
I really do. I am curious about that too. So I know families, all sorts of families, Angela, who are looking at getting their Irish or Italian or St. Martin's, passport that
Well, I
allows them
mean,
to get. Yeah.
that's
But to
different.
me, that it's just highly tactical. Building a cave and stocking it up like a not a hoarder. What do they call them? A oh gosh, the anyway,
Well,
survivalist.
I'm kind of
Nah,
like a survivalist. Yes.
yeah, I've always told people I don't want to survive an apocalypse. I don't want to be the last guy out there fighting zombies. That sounds awful. So yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. But can I be thoughtful about how our resources are utilized to help prevent the apocalypse? Yeah. Can I think about what role we'd play given our power and influence to help us as a global community get past this moment? Absolutely. That's really interesting. That's fun. That's a problem to solve. That's the thing. That's maybe the better way to say it is rather than being at Bain, we used to say you want to be at cause. And what does that mean? Well, it's the opposite of being at effect. And when you're at effect, it means things are happening to me. When you're at cause, you're causing things to happen. I'm an at cause person. I want to cause things to happen. Not necessarily a tidal wave. I'm happy making ripples, but I want to be at cause. Great families are at cause. Great families who are at effect are ones that think about wealth preservation, destroy wealth over time, and they eventually the money runs out. So that would be
Yes.
my feedback to you, is be at cost.
Well, we really only have, before I give you a chance to close and share how people can reach out, probably 2 or 3 more minutes. I'm going to end with AI. I've been extremely active in the community for a couple of years. I go to Silicon Valley all the time. I travel the world. I talk about it. Uh, Over one third of my investment portfolio is in public and private things in AI and robotics. I'm living what I'm talking about. I put my order in for the NVIDIA DGX Spark personal AI supercomputer coming out this June. I built my own AI
Wow.
structures. I'm active in interweaving AI agents. And effectively, my structures and family office is becoming way more. And this is the year, quote unquote, AI centric. I could do more with less, better, and faster. Do I have
Yes.
concerns from a societal perspective, mainly jobs? Of course. Do I think that Silicon Valley is poo-pooing that a little bit, not to scare people? Yes, honestly. There's not going to be any easy landing relative to that. We might even have significant societal upheaval, and it may get
Hmm.
really bad, to be honest with you. AI will never be weaker than it is today. I think robotics will be the biggest industry ever within 15 or 20 years. And fundamentally, it's going to change everything within the family office. I'm already building that stack. I have it working for me in some aspects 24/7. And yes, I'm that person well ahead of the curve, living through it and doing it myself. And I'll be doing some master classes this summer on effectively creating effectively in 3 days your own more AI focused family office. And it is something that I'm extremely active in as a principal and actually
Yes.
doing it. We don't have enough time to do 1 or 2 hours, but I'll give you the final comment relative to how family offices may need to think about AI, less so from investing, but that could play a little bit into your answer, more so thinking about things more strategically and deeper thinking.
It's such a powerful comment you made about AI. We used to say when I worked for the Gateses that today is as simple as things will ever be again.
Yes.
And it's a really powerful way of stating it, which is similar to what you said about AI, is that AI is as least powerful today is as
It's
least
ever going to
powerful
be.
as it will ever
Right.
going to be,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And I get that. And I think it's a really important because it is, um, one of the things it's telling you, Angelo, is that if you are not aware and really going deep on AI, that's going to be a problem. And this is even more so than the internet back in the early 90s. It's more than, the computer age back in the 70s and 80s. We were fortunate enough that we had an Apple II Plus in my house in 1980 or 79, whenever,
Wow.
77, maybe whenever it came out. Um, my father worked at IBM and he got us an Apple. And they were very expensive, but he knew that his 5 boys should have access to Apples. We then got one of the very first IBM PCs that anybody had, probably one of the first 1,000, quite honestly. Um, and what did we do on it? We played games, of course. Anyway, but the thing about AI is if you're not focused on AI and learning, you will miss it, and it will be a big, devastating miss. That's number one. You're clearly, I know you believe that too. One of my favorite other podcasts is called Exponential View. Do you know that podcast,
No,
Angelo?
no, I don't.
Okay, Azim Azar, and he has been talking about exponential growth in and abundance for a decade. And of course, with the taking off of AI, he has become one of the foremost experts in terms of the application of AI to culture, to business. He's just extraordinary. I also asked my family. I was mentioning earlier that I had this anecdote I wanted to share about AI. I have triplets who are 26 years old, and one of whom is married, so a son-in-law. And so I asked the four of them, "How are you using AI in your life today?" And they all came back to me very, very quickly on text, of course, and they shared, "Here's how I'm using AI. I use AI multiple times a day. I'm constantly using AI. But the best one, and this is just a small but nice anecdote, is my son-in-law is a big fan of Wendell Berry, who is a great American poet. Just one of the
Indeed.
Midwestern, yes, he just Midwestern values. And so my son-in-law loves him so much that he actually asks AI for life uh, instruction, life kind of hints. And so he and my daughter are thinking about moving to London. And he asked Wendell, should he move to London with his wife, given these different, parameters to take into consideration. And it says, and his AI question was, please use Wendell Berry as a source of
I,
the feedback.
that's a hell of a prompt.
Isn't that amazing? It's okay, Angelo. Maybe the next question I put in there is, hey, I want to build a family office from scratch. Tell me what Angelo Robles would do.
That's
Oh,
what scares me. I'm going to get myself out of a job, which is why I
you're
use,
not though. You're
I
not. You're
use,
not. I
well, I
disagree.
mean, I'm using now because I don't want to keep on training the system. I use open source platforms on my computer that I don't share. And why I'm
Yes.
getting the NVIDIA DGX Spark is I don't want to share my proprietary content, which I think is unique, at least I do, with the world. I mean, that sounds a little greedy from my perspective. There's a deeper answer, but I want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah.
Gates, and I'm going to mix it up a little bit, basically said, I did a video in Nevada a little bit about this. Within 2 years, 90% of coders gone.
Yes.
Gates said this, within 10 years, 90% of doctors. I 100% agree with that. I look at the world of legal and accounting, which is changing the dynamic of partnerships and associates. You don't need to have as many associates to now come up to be
Right.
partner. That's a longer story. Hollywood is going to be revamped by people like you and me that could create our own movies. And if we have a big social network, which we don't, but those that do, they have massive distribution. And the world of finance and analyst, come on. It's
Yeah.
obvious. Is it going to happen in 12 months? No. But is it going to take 10 or 20 years? No. It's happening much quicker than that. And I don't have
Yes.
great answers for repositioning, but well, I kind of do have some solutions, but we don't have enough time. Maybe an ending, Stephen, if you don't mind, if you could share with people that would like to learn more about your services and how to reach out and
Yeah.
learn more about Banyan.
I really appreciate that opportunity, Angela. That means a lot to me. If you go to the website banyan.global, so banyan.global, you can see who we are, what we do. We have enormous amount of our content on there, our intellectual property that really helps frame the way we think about the work that we do. And one of the most powerful things about Banyan is that our methodology, our process is actually the thing that matters most, because ultimately we don't bring answers to families. We help families come to the right answer for themselves. We facilitate that process through our engagement, and that cannot be replicated with AI, Angelo. There's just no way. And that's why I think you are going to be safe from being replaced by AI, and actually you become even more valuable. Once I understand how Angelo thinks about something, I really want to work with Angelo. I want to work with the Banyan team. And to me, the power of Banyan is helping our clients achieve extraordinary outcomes. And those extraordinary outcomes allow those families to ultimately have multi-generational success. And that is so rewarding to me personally. It's rewarding to the broader team. And so that's what we focus on. And we're really focused on ownership, governance, leadership succession, generational transitions, those things that are very specific to dynastic families, as you know, we don't really want to call them, but really what they are. So that's my pitch. We do it differently. We do it better. We've got Dennis Jaffe on our team because we
Of
understand
course.
the
And they got
power of
Stephen
Dennis
Roche on
Jaffe.
the team. Come on. They got a powerhouse lineup of, I'm a New York Yankees fan, of Aaron Judges. How about that?
I'll take that.
And Stephen, for those that would like to reach out or learn more, the website and email, how could they do so?
Yeah, so my email is sroche@banyan.global, and I would welcome any outreach at any time. I love to have conversations. You don't need to hire us. I'm willing to have conversations because this is what I love to do. It's my passion, is to really think through how families can do what they do even better. It's that idea of that full potential. A full potential of a family with this kind of wealth is extraordinary what they can accomplish. I want to be part of that and help facilitate that. So
Yeah.
sroche@banyan.global.
And everyone, Stephen's incredible. And look at what a gracious gentleman he is. And for my members, I'm happy to make a personal introduction. I'm sure Stephen will maybe be at one of our in-person events, West Coast or East Coast. We'll invite him as a special speaker. And Banyan has been around for years. They're incredibly well regarded. And I encourage every business owning family office to learn about these incredible resources and an organization like them that could be so valuable in terms of to you. I'll try to keep my wrap up quick, and maybe I'm not quite as kind to Stephen offering those conversations. I think I give a fair amount of things away for free in my videos, but really that one-on-one connection, I need to be respectful to my members who are contributors to my organization and consulting relationships. And a lot of the proprietary knowledge on excellence in the family office, on practice management, on areas thinking more global, on the sovereign risk issues that Stephen briefly brought up, and definitely on AI and what stack and things I'm using. I keep a little bit of that a little more close to the vest. But all you have to do is, if you see value in what I'm doing and look at me as being different than what is traditionally out there, and I am. Some of my members say, I don't even like you that much, but I believe I'm going to get one thing, maybe only one thing that's going to be so incredible from you, or people that I meet through you, like someone like Stephen one-on-one, that is easily going to be worth, let's call it the price of admission. So go to angelorobles.com, go to membership, and as a family or family office only, as we march up to 100, join and be a part of it. If you service the community, I still love you. You can reach out to me, some of my free content, it's all yours. But then membership would not be applicable, but I do consultative and masterclass work around that could be valuable to you. And I will make an announcement within the next week or so that I hinted at a little bit earlier, that I will be taking on 10 families where I will be effectively really educating, providing skill acquisition, resources, and connectivity to effectively become much more AI savvy and native in their family office. That's for principals, rising gen, and family office executives. It'll be an immersive 2 days. I'll do 2 of them over the summer, and I'm limiting the amount of families. I'm charging a bit of a premium for it, but it's going to put you from the AI perspective on fundamental operations. I mean, honestly, in the top 1/100th of 1%. And I'm going to do it very quickly, a couple of days. And you're going to meet the machine learners, the AI integration engineers that could then help you, along with me if you want, help to execute on what you're going to learn. So again, go to angelorobles.com and learn more. Any of you could text me anytime at 203-570-2898. Stephan Roche, you've been very gracious with your time, an incredible guest. I look forward to meeting you in person one day soon and having you back both digitally and hopefully in person at one of my in-person events for members. Thank you so much.
I can't wait to see you in person, Angela, and thanks so much for having me on.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you, everyone.